The day I accidentally became the babysitter for a random family at the beach. Last July, on a day so bright it felt like the sun had something to prove, Luca and I pulled into the beach parking lot with one of those rare, perfectly simple plans. Nothing dramatic, nothing exciting. The kind of plan you almost don't say out loud because it feels too easy. Tan a little, swim a little, grab something overpriced from a boardwalk stall, and head home with sandy feet and zero stress. That was it. That was the entire dream. As soon as I opened the car door, a warm wave of salty air hit me, the kind that instantly melts your shoulders into vacation mode, even if you're not on vacation. The sound of the ocean drifted over the dunes, soft and rhythmic at first, then louder as the breeze shifted. Kids were already laughing. Someone was blasting a summer playlist in the distance. A volleyball smacked the sand somewhere behind us. It felt like walking straight into a postcard. Luca swung his towel over his shoulder and grinned. Tell me this isn't peak summer. He wasn't wrong. Even the sand looked inviting, sparkling under the midday sun like someone had sprinkled gold dust across the beach. I slid off my sandals and let my feet sink in, letting the warmth wrap around my toes. There's a specific kind of joy in that first barefoot step onto hot sand. A small, quiet moment that whispers, relax. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. We walked toward the shoreline, weaving between families, couples, solo sunbathers, surfboards, coolers, and beach umbrellas in every shade imaginable. The ocean stretched out in front of us, endless, blue, and impossibly calm. The waves rolled in slow, easy breaths, like the whole sea was lounging right alongside us. This is perfect, I said, already imagining the next few hours. No responsibilities, no noise, no chaos. Just sun, salt water, and the kind of lazy silence that only summer afternoons can make. We scanned the beach for a spot, somewhere not too close to loud groups, not too isolated, with enough space to stretch out like starfish. Finally, we found it, a small open patch of sand with a good view of the water and just enough shade from an umbrella a few feet away. We claimed it immediately, dropping our towels like two explorers planting flags after a long expedition. Luca spread his towel with the precision of someone who takes beach time extremely seriously. I just flopped mine down and hoped it landed in the general direction of flat. For a moment we stood there and just breathed, warm sun on our shoulders, cool breeze brushing our faces, that salty smell filling our lungs. It felt like the universe had finally given us a day off. Nothing ambitious. I reminded myself with a smirk. Just vibes. I stretched my legs out, lowered myself onto the towel, and felt the sun settle over me like a warm blanket. My body instantly loosened. My mind drifted. The waves made a soft, hypnotic shhh sound, like the ocean was gently shushing every thought I didn't need. It was peaceful, calm, idyllic, a cinematic wide shot of serenity. And for about 30 seconds, I truly believed that was how the day would stay. Just 30 seconds. Because somewhere behind me, buried under the gentle soundtrack of the ocean and muffled summer conversations, a small but powerful energy was already building. A tremor of chaos, the kind that only families with multiple children can generate. I didn't know it yet, but Luca and I had placed our towels next to a full-blown beach empire, and that peaceful, relaxing plan we were so proud of. It was about to evaporate faster than sunscreen on hot skin. If my life were a movie, this is the moment where the peaceful background music would suddenly cut off and be replaced with something louder, more dramatic, something with drums, because as I leaned back on my towel, soaking in the sun, I finally turned my head to the right and realized we hadn't just sat next to a family, we had sat next to the family. The kind of family that doesn't go to the beach, they deploy to it. Their setup covered more square footage than some studio apartments, umbrellas staked into the sand like they were claiming territory. Chairs arranged in a half-circle command center, coolers packed with enough food to outlast a minor apocalypse, sand toys scattered everywhere, buckets, shovels, molds, sifters, a neon green rake for reasons I cannot explain. There were inflatable animals in various stages of inflation, towels clipped to chairs, swim diapers drying on umbrella spokes. It was like walking into a mini beach city. All of this should have been my first warning. It wasn't. The dad was crouched down in front of what I thought was a normal sandcastle, but upon closer inspection it was architectural. He had carved battlements, towers, a moat, and what genuinely looked like a functioning drawbridge made from a popsicle stick and wet sand. He leaned over his creation with the focus of a medieval engineer preparing for siege warfare. A few feet away, the mom was running what could only be described as a sunscreen triage unit, 3 children. 3, each spinning around like hyperactive satellites while she chased them with a bottle of SPF 50. She wasn't applying sunscreen so much as fighting for her life. 1 kid, maybe 7, kept slipping out of her grasp like a greased seal, shouting, "I don't need IT, I'm already tan." Another kid was sitting in the sand, smearing fistfuls of it across his legs in what he apparently believed was an alternative method of sun protection. The mom's face said she had fought this battle many times before. And she was losing. A grandmother sat in a beach chair behind them, wearing oversized sunglasses and a giant floppy hat, supervising everything with the energy of someone who had earned her right to relax. She sipped from a water bottle with the slow satisfaction of a woman who survived parenting in the 80s and was done with field work. Meanwhile, the tiniest child, who couldn't have been more than 3, was bouncing in place wearing inflatable arm floaties that were nearly the size of her torso. She looked like a marshmallow dressed as a safety boy. And there I was, lying on my towel, blissfully unaware that this entire ecosystem was about to swallow me whole. Luca, still optimistic, dusted off his hands and said, "It's fine. Big families always bring too much stuff." Then he added, "I'm going to grab us drinks. Don't let anyone steal my towel." I raised 2 fingers in a lazy salute. Try not to get kidnapped. He snorted and walked off toward the concession stand, leaving me alone next to the ever-expanding family empire. I closed my eyes for maybe 10 seconds, just long enough for the warmth to sink into my skin. When I heard a soft popping noise, like a cork releasing from a bottle, I ignored it at first. Beaches make weird sounds. Then came the unmistakable splat of a sand toy hitting the ground, then a small child exclaiming, "Look what I found." I sat up. The dad was now digging passionately into the moat. The mom had entered round 4 of the sunscreen battle. The kids were darting around like lightning bugs, and the littlest one, the one with the giant floaties, the one shaped like a marshmallow with legs, was toddling straight toward the ocean, across the sand. Unaccompanied, focused, determined, like a tiny mission-driven robot, and not a single adult noticed. I stared for a moment, then sighed the sigh of a man whose peaceful day was dying before his eyes. Because this was the beginning of everything, the moment the universe tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, ready for your shift." There's a very specific kind of fear that hits you when you see a tiny human walking straight into the ocean with the confidence of someone who's survived multiple lifetimes. It's not dramatic fear. It's not the scream and run kind. It's the slow, dawning, "Oh no, I'm the only responsible adult within a 10-foot radius, aren't I?" kind. That was me. That was my moment. Floaty girl, this marshmallow, sized toddler with inflatable arm rings quadruple the size of her biceps, was toddling across the sand like she had somewhere extremely important to be. She didn't even hesitate. Her little legs slapped the sand in determined, uneven thumps, the floaties squeaking with each step like a pair of tiny rubber chickens. Meanwhile, her entire family was preoccupied with their own personal side quests. The dad was sculpting a new defensive buttress on his sandcastle, looking like a medieval architect who had just discovered structural flaws. The mom was wrestling the middle child, who was screaming at the top of his lungs, "I like the burn. I want to be a dragon." The grandmother had reclined so far into her beach chair that she might as well have merged with the fabric. No one, not one single adult, was watching the escapee. I sat there on my towel for 2 long seconds, hoping, praying, that someone else would notice. Nobody did. Okay, great, I muttered. I pushed myself to my feet, brushing sand off my palms, and started jogging toward her. I wasn't sprinting, more like that awkward half run you do when you don't want to look dramatic, but also don't want a toddler to walk into the Atlantic. As I got closer, she stepped right into the first line of foamy waves. They washed over her tiny feet, and she gasped. This adorable little gasp, like she'd just discovered cold water was illegal, but she kept going. Determined, mission-oriented, hey there, I said, slowing down so I didn't scare her. Where are we heading? She turned around, blinked up at me with big eyes full of sunshine and zero fear, and grinned. I swear she radiated pure baby mischief. Before I could say anything else, she grabbed onto my finger, my entire finger, with both her tiny hands like I had just been assigned to her by some cosmic daycare manager. Then she sat herself down on the wet sand beside the water like, yes, good, you stop ocean now. I gently pulled her back a step. Let's stay a little higher up, yeah, maybe not swim alone. She stared at me, then plopped onto her butt, scooted backward a bit, and continued holding my finger as if to say, you belong to me now. I looked over my shoulder, waiting for a frantic parent to come sprinting in slow motion, shouting, my baby, but no. The dad was still knee-deep in medieval engineering. The mom was now negotiating peace terms with the sunscreen-resistant dragon child. The grandma was vibing with the clouds. I could have grown a beard, and no one would have noticed. So I guided Floaty Girl back toward my towel area, still holding her tiny hand. She followed without hesitation, like I was her assigned keeper. When we reached my towel, she let go of my finger, plopped herself dead, center on it, and looked up at me with a face that clearly said, this is mine now. I stood there, stunned. Of all the towels on all the beaches in all the world, she chose mine. She leaned forward, scooped up a handful of wet sand, and offered it to me. Not handed, offered, like it was a sacred relic, and there I was, standing in the sun, holding a fistful of soggy sand from a toddler I had never met, wondering if this counted as a legally binding contract. Just then, from behind me, I heard the mother's voice, soft at first, then growing louder. Oh, thank you, I didn't even see her wander off, finally apparent. But instead of panic, instead of swooping in to reclaim her child, she gave me a tired smile and said, can you keep an eye on her for a second? We need to reorganize everything. A second. I nodded. I don't know why I nodded. Reflex, maybe. And as she walked away to deal with the swirling storm of her other children, I looked down at Floaty Girl, who was now patting my towel like she owned beach-front property. I realized the truth. I wasn't watching her for a second. My shift had already started. When the mom finally approached, she didn't look panicked. Not even a little. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from parenting multiple small humans who are powered entirely by sugar and chaos. She had a streak of sunscreen across her cheek and a beach towel wrapped around her shoulders like a cape of resignation. Thank you. She exhaled, pushing her hair out of her face as she looked down at her toddler, who was currently patting my towel like a real estate agent demonstrating property value. I didn't even see her wander off. Oh, no worries, I said, doing that awkward little wave strangers do when trying not to seem creepy around children they don't know. She gave me a grateful smile, then made the request, can you keep an eye on her for a second? We just need to reorganize everything. Now, here's the thing about the word second. It's a lie. It is a linguistic trap. There has never been a moment in the history of human parenting where a second meant anything close to one actual second. But in my naive, softened brain, I still believed her. Sure, I said. The moment the word left my mouth, I felt the spiritual door of responsibility slam shut behind me. The mom hurried back to her battlefield, where the middle child had now started a passionate argument about whether sand could be classified as a food group. The dad was adjusting the angle of the umbrella like he was lining up a satellite dish during a thunderstorm. The grandma lifted her sunglasses, gave me a lazy nod of thanks, then returned to whatever imaginary talk show she seemed to be watching behind those lenses. So there I was, standing guard beside Floaty Girl, who, now that she had acquired a babysitter, appeared fully committed to exploring the entire geological catalog of sand textures. She picked up a handful of gritty sand, inspected it with scientific seriousness, then dropped it in my palm with a solemn expression. I accepted it like it was ancient treasure. "Thank you," I said, because I had forgotten how to talk to toddlers and defaulted to customer service voice. She nodded approvingly and began preparing another fistful. Minutes passed, the sun shifted, people walked by. Somewhere in the distance, a seagull screamed what sounded like a personal insult. I kept waiting for the mom to return and say, "All done, thank you, she's ours again." She did not. Instead, the family chaos seemed to intensify. The middle child started crying because his sandcastle tower was too round. The older kid declared war on a seagull that looked at his chips. The dad dropped an entire bag of snacks and a chorus of "nuo" rose from the children like a tragic Greek play. The mom kept trying to reorganize the cooler, but every time she opened it, someone yelled, "Mom, where's the something, anything, everything?" Meanwhile, Floaty Girl remained perfectly calm. Serene even, as if she had chosen the one adult who radiated non-parent energy and knew he was helpless to escape. She waddled a bit closer, plopped down beside me with a thud, and leaned her entire body against my leg like she had known me since birth. There was no going back. I was chosen. I glanced across the beach, hoping to spot Luker returning with drinks, because at this point I needed emotional support and maybe electrolytes, but he was nowhere. Not a silhouette on the boardwalk, not a speck on the horizon, nothing. I sighed. "Okay, little one." I murmured, "Just hanging out together for a second. Right." Floaty Girl responded by handing me a clump of wet sand, shaped vaguely like a potato. Great, I was now a sand potato collector. Another couple of minutes passed, long enough for me to question every life choice that led me to this point, when the dad waved vaguely at me from across the chaos, as if I were part of his staff. I waved back because apparently that is who I was now. I checked the time. It had been 10 minutes, 10 whole minutes. I looked down at Floaty Girl, who was now humming to herself and building a tiny, lopsided mound on my towel. "A second," I whispered. Sure, why not? I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a favor. This was orientation, and my unpaid internship with this family had just begun. Somewhere around the 12-minute mark of my 1-second babysitting job, I realized something important. Floaty Girl was not simply hanging out with me. She was onboarding me, and she did it the way toddlers do, silently, confidently, and with absolutely no regard for my personal plans. She scooted closer on my towel, her floaties squeaking like tiny rubber balloons, and held out another handful of wet sand. This one was extra soggy, dripping onto my leg. "Thank you," I said again, because I still hadn't figured out an alternative. She beamed, proud of her work. Then she grabbed my wrist, gently guided my hand toward her sand pile, and tapped it like she was teaching me how to contribute. That was the moment I realized I had been promoted. I was no longer just the guy watching her. No, no, I was now officially part of her construction crew. She babbled something that sounded like bee woo, and slapped the sand mound with both her hands, splattering wet sand all over my towel, my shorts, my soul. I tried to laugh. I really did. Wow, that's architectural. She giggled, a full, joyful baby giggle that felt like sunshine and sugar. Before I could even process that, a shadow fell over me. I looked up to see another child, maybe 5 years old, staring at me with the intensity of someone evaluating whether I was qualified for employment. He had a plastic shovel in one hand and a blue bucket in the other. A streak of sunscreen was drying on his forehead like war paint. "Do you know how to build a tunnel fort?" he asked. "A tunnel fort? I did not know how to build a tunnel fort. I did not even know if tunnel forts were structurally possible, or if this was a trap designed to test my worthiness. But when a tiny, serious child with sand in his eyebrows asks if you possess a specialized skill, there is only one correct answer. "I can try," I said. He nodded, satisfied, and handed me the shovel with the gravitas of someone passing down a family heirloom. "Okay," he said, "you're on my team." My team, it was official. I had been fully absorbed into the family workforce. He plopped down beside Floaty Girl, who immediately shoved a handful of sand into his bucket. He accepted it like a business partner receiving crucial supplies. Meanwhile, I tried to figure out how exactly one constructs a tunnel fort. I dug a tunnel-shaped trench. They both nodded approvingly like, yes, yes, he gets it. Then the middle child stormed over, dramatic as a soap opera actor. He dropped to his knees beside us. "Are you the new builder?" he demanded. "The new builder? What happened to the old one?" I opened my mouth to ask, but he thrust a broken sand mold into my hand and said, "We need reinforcements. Dad's castle is under attack." Attack from what? The waves, time, poor foundations. But before I could ask for clarification, Floaty Girl shoved another sand potato into my free hand. Apparently that meant stay on task. So I stayed on task. There I sat on my towel turned workstation, surrounded by children who had reorganized me into their play hierarchy. I dug, patted, molded, dumped, and pretended I knew what I was doing. Kids would occasionally run back to ask me questions. "Is this deep enough? Does this look like a bridge? Can you fix this tower? Do tunnels need doors? Can you hold my crab?" The answer to that one was a hesitant yes. Every few minutes another wet pile of sand was deposited into my lap by Floaty Girl, who seemed thrilled to have a new assistant. She hummed happily, patting the sand like she was approving my work. I kept glancing toward the boardwalk, desperate to see Luca. Finally, he appeared in the distance, holding 2 cold drinks like he was returning from a heroic quest. His steps slowed the closer he got. His eyebrows slowly rose, and then he said it, flat deadpan, utterly unimpressed. "I leave you alone for 5 minutes." I looked up at him from the ground, shovel in one hand, sand potato in the other, surrounded by 3 children who were treating me like their unionized laborer. "Please," I whispered, "help." Floaty Girl immediately clapped her tiny hands and yelled something that definitely meant no. "He's ours now." Luca laughed hard. I was too deep, too embedded, too recruited. And I knew there was no escaping this family now. I remember standing there on the sand, still processing the fact that I had somehow become a part-time caretaker for a family I'd known for less than half an hour, when the universe apparently decided things were still too calm. The wind, which had been gently flirting with the edges of our towels all afternoon, suddenly transformed into this dramatic, over-caffeinated gust, like it had been waiting backstage for the right moment to make its grand entrance. I didn't even have time to say oh before their giant beach umbrella. This towering, colorful monstrosity tilted, wobbled, and then launched itself across the sand with the enthusiasm of a medieval spear fired from a catapult. I swear I heard a whooshing sound, like the umbrella considered itself a heroic warrior sprinting toward battle. The dad, who had been quietly and very seriously reinforcing his sandcastle walls like some kind of sand engineer defending a tiny kingdom, looked up at the exact moment the umbrella took flight. His face morphed from pride to horror in half a second. "Oh, no, not again!" he yelled, as if this umbrella had a documented history of rebellion. He sprinted after it with surprising speed for a man who had spent the last hour crouched in the sand. But the universe wasn't done. Halfway into his heroic chase he tripped, launched forward, taking down an inflatable flamingo that had been innocently lounging beside them. The flamingo, insulted by this betrayal, bounced once, then immediately decided it had had enough of humanity and rolled straight into the ocean. The kids went ballistic. I'm talking full emotional meltdown, like they were watching their most prized national treasure drift away into the horizon. Floaty Girl gasped so dramatically you'd think the flamingo was her biological child. The middle kid screamed, "Someone save Mr. Flappy," at a pitch that probably alerted dolphins 3 miles offshore. Oh no, Luca was zero help. He was already keeled over laughing, struggling to breathe, hands on his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I leave you 5 minutes, 5 minutes," he managed to choke out like this was somehow my fault. The mom just sighed, not a panicked sigh, not an "oh no, the flamingo" sigh. No, this was the sigh of a woman who had seen every kind of beach disaster known to humankind and had long accepted her fate. She didn't even get up. She just pointed vaguely toward the water and said, "Can you get that? They'll cry for an hour if it floats away." And she said it to me. Not to her husband, who was still sprawled dramatically in the sand like he had been defeated in battle. Not to Luca, who, frankly, was physically incapable of standing upright at the moment. No, she pointed at me. The stranger, the honorary babysitter, the temporary uncle. At that point, I think I just accepted that resistance was futile. So I nodded with the solemn duty of a man accepting a quest he never asked for, kicked off my sandals, and bolted toward the ocean. The flamingo was already drifting farther out, riding the waves like it was on a luxurious vacation cruise. I splashed into the water, arms flailing with all the grace of a confused baby giraffe. 2 waves slapped me in the face like the ocean itself was offended by my presence. I grabbed the flamingo's slippery plastic neck, nearly fell backward, regained my balance, and trudged out triumphantly. Floaty Girl clapped like I had just delivered a legendary Olympic performance. The middle kid saluted me. Even the dad, still lying dramatically on the sand, gave me a thumbs up like I had avenged his fallen pride. I returned with the flamingo, dripping from head to toe, exhausted, and questioning every life choice that had led me here. And that's when I realized I didn't just save a flamingo that day. I had fully become part of this family's chaos. By the time the flamingo rescue mission wrapped up, I was soaked, exhausted, and fully convinced that I had worked harder on this beach trip than I had in my actual job all month. I stood there dripping like a deflated seal while Floaty Girl hugged the flamingo, my flamingo, apparently, and the entire family looked at me with the kind of gratitude usually reserved for firefighters and surgeons. The wind calmed down as if it had finished its performance and decided to exit politely. The sun warmed my skin again, and for a brief moment everything felt peaceful, too peaceful, suspiciously peaceful. You know, that eerie stillness right before a toddler decides to dump a bucket of sand on someone's head. Yeah, that kind of peace. The mom clapped her hands together, looked around at the battlefield that was once their beach setup, and declared with the authority of a general, "All right, pack up time, everyone." Instant chaos. The kids immediately split into different emotional trajectories. Floaty Girl plopped onto the sand and started making shapes with her hands, completely ignoring orders. The middle kid began piling toys on top of each other in ways that made zero engineering sense. The oldest kid, whom I hadn't even properly met yet, went into full teenage protest mode, groaning like he was being asked to lift massive boulders instead of folding a towel. I watched all of this like a man who had accidentally wandered into the wrong movie, but decided to stay because the plot was fascinating. The dad stood up, brushed sand off his arms, and looked at me with the weary expression of someone who had accepted that life was chaos, but also appreciated a fellow soldier in the trenches. "Thanks again," he said, in the tone of a man admitting defeat to both nature and inflatable flamingos. The mom approached next, holding a Ziploc bag stuffed with snacks, chips, cookies, crackers, fruit snacks, the whole pantry. She pressed it into my hands like she was awarding me a medal. "Take these," she said. "For helping. You were a lifesaver. A lifesaver, me, a guy who came to the beach with absolutely zero ambition other than maybe not getting sunburned." I opened my mouth to say something modest, probably something along the lines of, "Oh, it was nothing." But then the grandma appeared. She walked right up to me, this tiny woman in a floral sun hat with the kind of authority only grandmothers possess, and cupped my face with both hands like I was her lost grandson returning from war. "You," she said firmly, "are a good boy." Before I could even process that declaration, she leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. I froze. Luca, who finally stopped laughing at my misery, stared wide-eyed like he was watching the plot twist of the century. The dad waved at me as he packed the last of their chairs. The mom thanked me one more time. The oldest kid muttered something about how the beach was more eventful than usual. Floaty girl gave me a fistful of wet, gritty sand as a farewell gift. The middle kid saluted me like I was his newly promoted captain. And just like that, the entire family started heading off toward the parking lot. A colorful parade of towels, bags, floaties, and chaos. They looked back 3 separate times to wave, every single time. Even the flamingo, now deflated and tucked under the dad's arm, seemed to be saying goodbye in spirit. Finally, they disappeared over the dune, and the beach fell quiet again. Luca just stared at me for a long, long moment. Then he shook his head slowly, dramatically, as if he was disappointed but also deeply entertained. "You realize," he said, "you worked a full shift for people we don't even know." I sighed, flopped onto my towel like a defeated hero, and replied, "Yeah, Luca, I know." Because somehow in the span of an hour I had gone from beach bum to honorary uncle, unpaid babysitter, flamingo rescuer, snack recipient, and officially, according to Grandma, a good boy. And honestly, I kind of loved it, just when I thought I might finally sit down and claim a sliver of relaxation, the universe apparently decided it had a plot twist ready, because the wind, which had been politely teasing our towels for hours, suddenly went rogue. Not a gentle breeze, not a playful gust. This was an epic, dramatic, full-on theatrical gust that seemed to have auditioned for a disaster movie, and then it happened. The family's giant umbrella, the one standing like a multicolored sentinel beside their fortress of sand and stilted precariously. I swear I could hear the fabric whistle like a warrior's horn as it launched itself across the sand with the kind of elegance only something doomed could achieve. 1 second it was there, casting shade over a small territory. The next it was airborne, flying like a medieval lance on a mission to conquer innocent sunbathers. The dad noticed first. His head shot up from the sandcastle he'd been reinforcing like some kind of sand architect defending a tiny kingdom, and when he saw it, his face went through this impossible range of emotions: pride, shock, horror, and finally full-blown panic. "Nuu!" he shouted, arms flailing like a man possessed. He took off after it like a sprinting superhero, but of course the universe wasn't done. Halfway through his heroic chase, he tripped spectacularly on a small sand dune, tumbling forward in a scene that could have been choreographed by the beach gods themselves. As he fell, his path intersected with an inflatable flamingo, the one he'd been carefully arranging earlier. The flamingo shot into the air like a buoyant missile, then began drifting toward the ocean, a pink comet against the deep blue waves. The kids lost their minds, absolute chaos. Floaty Girl squealed like the flamingo was a precious member of her family, waving her tiny arms in panic. The middle child cried Mr. Flappy Nuo in a voice that carried across the beach, while the oldest stomped dramatically like a miniature Shakespearean actor, lamenting the loss of a beloved artifact. Even some nearby sunbathers paused to watch the scene unfold, confused as to whether this was performance art or genuine disaster. Luca, meanwhile, leaned on a chair and laughed until tears streamed down his face. "I leave you alone for 5 minutes," he gasped between chuckles. He was still shaking his head in disbelief. 5 minutes, that's all it took for me to go from man enjoying a sunny beach day to designated chaos coordinator. And of course, in this surreal circus, the mom remained unnervingly calm. She didn't scream, she didn't panic, she just sighed, the kind of sigh that communicates years of experience, acceptance of inevitable disasters, and a hint of exhaustion that no ordinary mortal could comprehend. Then she pointed vaguely toward the ocean. "Can you get that?" she asked casually. "We'll cry for an hour if it floats away." And she didn't say it to the dad. She didn't say it to Luca. She said it to me. The stranger, the one who had been roped into sandcastle construction, tunnel fort engineering, and toddler sand, fist battles, me, it was at that moment I realized I had crossed a threshold. I nodded solemnly, accepted my fate, and sprinted toward the waves. Sand was sticking to my wet legs from earlier exploits, the salty breeze whipped my hair into my eyes, and the flamingo, this ridiculous inflatable pink creature, was drifting ever farther away. I knew there was no turning back. I was in. I plunged into the water, waves slapping me across the chest. My arms flailed like a maniac, my balance teetered on the edge of disaster, but somehow, I grabbed the flamingo and turned back toward shore. Each step was a struggle, my feet sliding on wet sand, my grip slipping once, twice, but the kids on the beach erupted into cheers. Floaty Girl clapped so hard I thought she might knock herself over, while the others gave me a standing ovation of sorts. And standing there, dripping, holding this pink plastic bird like a trophy, I realized something important. I wasn't just watching a family anymore. I was part of their story, a temporary uncle, a flamingo rescuer, a sand lieutenant. And apparently a superhero in their eyes. By the time I realized I was being tasked with rescuing a flamingo, I had already accepted that my life on this beach was no longer about relaxation. The flamingo, bright pink and ridiculously defiant, was bobbing on the waves like it had somewhere far more important to be. The kids' screams echoed across the sand, the kind of high-pitched dramatic wailing that makes you question whether humans were genetically designed for mild chaos or extreme chaos. "Mr. Flappy, save him," shouted the middle child, and I swear I could hear the desperation in his tiny voice echoing in my very soul. Floaty Girl, perched precariously on her towel, flailed her arms like she was conducting a symphony, her little inflatable floaties squeaking with every movement. I couldn't deny it. The universe had given me a mission, and somehow, without asking for volunteers, I was it. I kicked off my sandals and sprinted toward the water, legs pounding into the wet sand. Each step was an awkward dance with the tide, sometimes sinking too deep, sometimes slipping on the slick surface, every now and then swallowing my pride in a small mouthful of Atlantic foam. The flamingo drifted farther with every second, as if it had plotted its own escape route, and I was merely a human obstacle in its path. I plunged into the first shallow wave, water rushing past my knees and soaking my shorts in seconds. I reached for the flamingo, grasped its slippery neck with both hands, and instantly realized that this rescue operation was far more complicated than it had seemed from the shore. The flamingo was light, yes, but the buoyancy made it awkward to maneuver. And the waves, oh, the waves, were having none of it. The first wave slammed against my chest, nearly knocking me over. I stumbled forward, flailing like a newborn giraffe learning to walk. My arms trembled as I clutched the flamingo, fighting to stay upright. The second wave hit harder. I almost fell face first into the water. If anyone had filmed this, it would have been an epic slow mo sequence worthy of Hollywood disaster cinema. Somehow, after what felt like an eternity of sloshing and stumbling, I finally managed to stabilize myself. The flamingo wobbled precariously, but it was still in my grasp. My legs burned from the effort of walking backward through the surf, my lungs heaving as if I had just run a marathon, and every hair on my head plastered to my forehead with salty water. Back on the sand, the kids erupted into unrestrained cheers. Floaty Girl jumped up and down, clapping so hard I thought she might topple over, squealing, "You did, IT, you did, IT." The middle child saluted me with exaggerated seriousness, holding his plastic shovel like a ceremonial sword. The oldest kid just shook his head, muttering something about "this is officially insane." But I knew he was impressed. The dad, who had finally recovered from his own earlier disaster, gave me a thumbs up from the sandcastle command center. The mom sighed in relief. Shaking her head like this was an ordinary Tuesday for her. Even the grandmother leaned forward in her chair, nodding approvingly as though I had passed some secret test for honorary family membership. I sank to my knees, panting, clutching the flamingo like it was a fragile treasure, and watched Floaty Girl approach, her arms outstretched. She grabbed the flamingo, hugging it like a victorious champion while giving me a look that clearly said yes. "You are mine now." I realized then that I wasn't just a temporary babysitter or a random guy on the beach. In this family's eyes, I had achieved hero status, flamingo rescuer, chaos coordinator, unofficial uncle. And somehow, after 30 minutes of this madness, I had not been fired. I looked back at Luca, who was still laughing, utterly helpless against the absurdity of the situation. "I leave you alone for 5 minutes," he managed, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. I nodded, wet, sand-covered, exhausted, and deeply aware that my day at the beach had escalated far beyond anything I had planned. I had come to relax. Instead, I had run through the surf, rescued a floating plastic flamingo, and officially become part of a family I barely knew. And honestly, somewhere in the chaos in the soaked hair and sandy shorts, I couldn't help but think this was oddly satisfying. By the time the chaos finally started to settle, I was standing in the middle of a sand battlefield that looked like a tornado had swept through a toy store. Towels were half buried, sandcastles collapsed in dramatic heaps, floaties flopped in puddles of water, and the flamingo, my flamingo, was safely clutched under my arm like a hero returning from battle. I was soaked, sunburned in places I didn't even know could burn, and covered head to toe in a thin layer of gritty sand that seemed determined to follow me home. The mom clapped her hands once, decisively, like a general signaling retreat. "All right," she said, scanning the wreckage with practiced calm. "Let's pack up." And just like that, a family who had spent hours building a beach empire began to fold it all back into something vaguely transportable. Chairs, umbrellas, buckets, floaties, all being corralling with efficiency that I could only admire and envy. I tried to step aside, to let them do their thing, but Floaty Girl planted herself firmly at my feet. She stared up at me with those big, trusting eyes, hands gripping the flamingo as if it and I were her property. I knelt down, offering a weak, exhausted smile. Okay, ready to go home soon. She didn't respond with words. She responded with a clapping squeal and a firm pat on my knee. Apparently my shift was not over. The middle child ran up, handing me his plastic shovel like I had earned a medal. "Thanks for helping," he said seriously, eyes bright with admiration. I nodded solemnly. Somehow I had become part of their operation, officially, indefinitely. The dad, now standing upright and brushing sand off his arms, gave me a nod that conveyed both exhaustion and respect. "You handled yourself well out there," he said. "Thanks for saving the flamingo." I shrugged, trying to act casual, though my legs were trembling from the earlier surf sprint. Just doing my part. I muttered, unsure if I was talking to him or to the universe that had orchestrated this entire ridiculous day. Then the mom handed me a Ziploc bag stuffed with snacks, a gesture that felt like a medal ceremony. Chips, fruit snacks, a cookie or two that might have survived earlier battles, all pressed into my hands with a quiet, sincere smile. "For helping," she said, "you deserve it." And then, as if the universe wasn't done piling absurdity onto my day, the grandmother waddled over with her slow, deliberate gait, glasses perched on her nose, and a wide, approving smile. She cupped my face in her hands, a gesture that made my knees weak despite the exhaustion, and planted a quick kiss on my cheek. "You're a good boy," she said firmly. I froze. I didn't know how to respond. This was far beyond anything I had ever expected from a day at the beach. Luca, who had been quietly observing the scene, was leaning against a chair, doubled over with laughter. "He's serious," he whispered, still chuckling. "You worked a full shift for strangers, and got promoted by a toddler and kissed by a grandma." A floaty girl handed me a fistful of wet sand, clearly her way of saying good-bye, and ran toward the dunes, following her family, who were finally packing up to leave. I watched them go, a parade of towels, chairs, bags, floaties, and tiny humans disappearing over the edge of the beach. The sun reflected off the water, waves gently lapping the shore, and for a moment it was quiet. Peaceful, almost cinematic in its calm after the storm of chaos. I sank onto my towel, dripping wet, sand sticking to every exposed surface of my body. Luca finally came over with the drinks he had promised, still shaking his head. "You realize," he said, voice filled with disbelief, "you came to the beach to relax, and left as their temporary uncle." I laughed, exhausted, sand, caked and strangely proud. "Yeah," I said, "I know." And as I looked out at the ocean, letting the sun dry my damp hair and the salty breeze calm my frazzled nerves, I realized something. I didn't get the relaxing day I planned. I got something better, a story. A ridiculous, chaotic, heartwarming story. I went to the beach to relax. I left as someone's temporary uncle, flamingo rescuer, and honorary family member. And honestly, I wouldn't have traded it for anything. By the time the family finally disappeared over the dunes, leaving behind only a few scattered towels, some abandoned buckets, and the faint echo of tiny giggles, I stood on the sand like a battle-worn hero surveying the aftermath of a long campaign. My clothes were soaked through. Sand was packed into every conceivable crease. My hair stuck to my forehead like I'd just crawled out of the ocean, and my legs still shook from running into waves like a man who had underestimated gravity and the Atlantic alike. I glanced down at my hands, wet, sandy, slightly sticky from a mix of sunscreen, snacks, and who knows what else the kids had pressed into them. Somehow, in a single afternoon, I had been transformed from a carefree beachgoer into the family's unofficial lifeguard, sandcastle architect, tunnel fort engineer, and, of course, flamingo rescue specialist. Luca finally ambled over, holding 2 drinks like a beacon of normalcy. He stopped a few feet from me, eyes wide, shaking his head. "You realize," he said slowly, carefully choosing his words like someone describing a scene from another planet, "you worked a full shift for people we don't even know, and got promoted by a toddler." I laughed, exhausted, and let myself flop down on my towel, ignoring the grains of sand that stuck stubbornly to my body. "Yeah," I said, "I know." For a moment we just sat there, listening to the gentle waves lap against the shore, the distant cries of seagulls, and the faint rustle of leftover beach toys drifting in the breeze. The contrast was surreal. Less than an hour ago, chaos had ruled this small patch of sand. Now it was as though the beach itself had taken a deep breath and sighed, leaving behind only the evidence of a minor war waged with sunscreen, plastic shovels, and tiny limbs. I glanced toward the water again, remembering the flamingo mission. The ridiculous sight of that pink inflatable drifting out to sea, my arms flailing like an amateur superhero, the cheers of the children, it all replayed vividly in my mind. Somehow I'd managed to complete a heroic quest that no one had ever trained me for, using skills I didn't even know I had. Floaty Girl's tiny handprints were still visible in the sand near my towel. I knelt to touch them, and for a second I thought about how quickly she had adopted me as her new favorite adult. A strange, warm feeling spread through me, equal parts pride, exhaustion, and disbelief. How does a day like this happen? How does someone show up for sun and surf and leave as part of a family they barely know? Luca nudged me with his elbow. "You're going to smell like sand and chaos for the rest of the week," he said, laughing, "and don't even get me started on your new title, honorary uncle." I smiled despite myself. I guess it could have been worse. I admitted I could have been assigned to build a sand castle and fend off rogue seagulls. He laughed harder this time. "I think we've both learned something today," he said, handing me a cold drink, "but mostly you. You're a natural. Don't think I didn't notice how serious you were about that flamingo rescue." I took a sip, letting the cold liquid soothe my sun-scorched throat. The sun hung low in the sky, golden and forgiving, casting long shadows across the sand. I leaned back on my elbows, feeling the grit under my fingers, and let myself reflect. This day had started with a simple plan: tan, swim a little, eat something overpriced, go home. Simple, predictable, relaxing, and yet it had turned into something extraordinary. A story of chaos, unexpected responsibilities, laughter, and surprisingly deep human connection, if only for an afternoon. And as I watched the last traces of the family vanish, I realized something important. Life has a funny way of taking the ordinary and turning it into something unforgettable. Sometimes it's a tiny toddler with oversized floaties. Sometimes it's a rogue umbrella or a drifting flamingo. But sometimes it's just being willing to say yes, to a second, to responsibility, to adventure, even when you didn't plan for it. I stood up, brushed the sand off as best I could, and smiled. I hadn't come to the beach to gain a family, a mission, or a story worth telling, and yet somehow I had all three. I walked back to the boardwalk with Luca, sticky, sand, covered, dripping, sunburned, and inexplicably happy. I went to the beach to relax. I left as someone's temporary uncle, a hero to a toddler, and a witness to chaos managed with love, patience, and laughter. And I knew one thing for certain: I would never forget this day.